So there's this big conversation going on right now. It's been going on for a while about contemporary art and how it's really, some people love it, some people hated it. I've done my own episodes on this, talking about my thoughts on the whole thing. But one of the reasons I think this conversation exists in the first place is because I think there's something really bad about just how we teach art in school and in life, I guess, because this isn't just something that I learned in classrooms or something that I sort of got an idea introduced to me in classrooms would be, I guess, the right way to say that. This is definitely an idea that was passed on to me by friends, family, mentors throughout my life in and out of schools. And this is this idea that the value in art is its capacity to be understood. I think it's a really toxic idea around art. I think it's a tough conversation to broach, though, because I think art being decoded, art being analyzed, art being talked about, discussed, and sparking conversations is genuinely my favorite thing about it. But that's not what makes art great, Oftentimes, I'm going to use school as an example here because I think it's probably the place we can all relate to this the most. Oftentimes, you'll be taught in school something like this. You'll be reading a book, and they'll tell you about a character's color shirt, or maybe their name is a biblical reference, or something of this extent. Maybe, the words they use follow a certain phrasing of a very famous sentence of words. Something like that, right? Very general, vague examples I'm using here on purpose. And when you are told to analyze this book, you are reading this in school, so the implicit message there is that this is a great book. It's expected that there will only be the best of books on the curriculum. So you're reading this book. Implicitly, you have the idea in your head, this is an amazing book. This is what good literature looks like. And all of your analysis around this book is being taught to you from the lens of what can you decode? What can you find? I remember this was a huge thing with me with Of Mice and Men, right? Because my teacher in school thought it was all a biblical metaphor, which it very well could be. I don't know for sure. But I just had the take of I thought the book wasn't that interesting. I personally, maybe now I think I'd probably see more value in it now that I'm a better read individual and like books like that just more than I did back then. But back then I was like, I don't like this. And much of the conversation it was almost like we were having two different conversations. Like, she was sort of talking about no, but the value, don't you see how they did this, this, and this? And to me, as somebody who didn't grow up religious by any means and, only came to religion later in his life after this conversation actually, really got my thoughts down about my spiritual beliefs, it was like she was speaking a different language to me. I was like, I don't care. I don't think you understand. You can tell me that this is derivative of this other thing all you want. I see no value in that because I don't understand that other thing to begin with, right? This is, of course, a very personal issue to have, and as much as I'd be willing to bet maybe some other people have gone through similar things, I do understand it's ultimately a me problem, right? This is very much my problem coming because of me and my want to debate this teacher over this in high school. Don't worry, I did this after class. I did not make the whole class sit through this, although probably did that quite a bit in high school. Either way, I think that the fundamental disconnect between me and this teacher is that she thought, and, has the right to the opinion, that this book holds value because it has symbolism, it has meaning, it has metaphor, you can deconstruct it, you can put it back together, and in the same way that, a well-seasoned steak will not just taste like steak, but have a very complex, unique, and deep palate to it, or a flavor profile. Guys, can I be honest? I really can't taste the difference between a good steak and a bad steak, but that's besides the point. Just like how that's how seasoning works in food, that you want something to have a unique, complex flavor profile with notes that you can, taste and all this bullshit. That's what you want in a book. Something to feast on, something complex, something to dig into. And I think that, well, honestly, I think it's just a dangerous way of looking at art because it really only is able to teach a appreciation for well-renowned classics. It's the same reason that, a kid, let's say, I'm thinking of what was relevant when I was in high school. Let's say, like, Stranger Things, right? A kid watches Stranger Things. They're like, that was so cool. I loved that Netflix show. And then, because their thoughts can only be articulated as well as, I liked that, and they're not able to point to deep symbolism or these things because they have not been taught to do so on their own accord. They're only taught to analyze these collectively renowned works. They come away from it with the idea Stranger Things is low art, whereas, the novel we're reading in English class is high art. These are two different things. One of these is for entertainment's sake only, and can only be for entertainment's sake, and it's just that, it's popcorn. Whereas the other is a gourmet meal, and there's no way to look at these things as equal in any regard. This is maybe not what somebody would directly say, but it's definitely what their actions indicate based on the art that they consume and how they talk about it, right? And as they should. I mean, that's what you're taught. Most people are smart enough to understand what they're being taught, and they're going to go, yeah, no, I understand that. This is how I will judge these things in my life. The real disconnect there is you felt how good Stranger Things was. At one point, somebody had to read Of Mice and Men and feel on an intuitive level how great it was. Then they go in and they can get all their symbolism out. They can dig through it. There's symbolism in everything if you're willing to look. If somebody wants to, they can analyze the symbolism in the paint splatters on the set. They can analyze the symbolism in the watch I'm wearing and the ring I'm wearing and come up with some deeply, sociological commentary being made in Paint Talk. I threw on this watch because I want to wear it today. These paint splatters happen randomly, but you could find the symbolism and you could make an argument for it. You could even go as far as rejecting what I just said, that it's all random, and come up with your own explanation that I said that to mislead you, in an effort to get away from the fact that there is a deep symbolism in all of this. If you can make a compelling enough case, anything is allowed to be true in a subjective field. This is the premise that we're not taught when we're looking at art in, the way we're raised to look at art. We are not taught this idea that it is subjective, that you can dig for whatever you want, in whatever you want, as long as you're willing to lay out that case. Why do I think it's damaging, though? Because I think that when we get to this conversation of contemporary art, how we started this whole episode, I think that is where it's damaging, because now everybody is looking at this contemporary art, and since they can't exactly understand it right away, they can only feel that they have a general disdain for it, either because A, they can't understand it, or B, they find the aesthetics of it to be worse off. The only thing, if you're taught that the only thing that's good is art that can be fully explained and understood and dissected like it's a puzzle, then all you're left with outside of that to do on your own volition, because most people aren't taught how to actually dissect the art, they're just taught how to dissect what they're fed, and that's not me saying that people are dumb or anything, that's me saying that there's something wrong with the way we teach art. I think that it would be an extremely formative experience if teachers would let kids pick their own books to read and say, you have to analyze this to its level of depth and use all these other sources in it. And I would go as far as saying I think that's something an elementary schooler could do if you let them do it. If you don't put as many constraints on it, sorry, I just hit the mic. If you don't put as many constraints on it and you completely open their window to go, you can pick Green Eggs and Ham and analyze it with the Magic Tree House and see what you can find in there, then I think the kids would be able to do it, because I think when you let people have that level of imagination, they will learn how to truly, truly reach, and let them reach. You want people to reach, because that's how you get everything that we now know as ordinary was at one point a reach, was at one point insane. Let them do that. I think that level of critical thinking is extremely powerful, and something you're not only not taught, but you're discouraged to do in school, and that's why I've never liked it. Because I think that, we're in this time where we've given up on these ideas of like everything is objective, everything has like society around us has largely surpassed that. People don't look around them and go like everything here is one way and to be understood one way. Most people at this point are very open to the idea that like, no, the world is an interpretable thing. That is not a radical idea anymore, but we're still teaching as if it is. And I think that's a big disconnect. Sorry, I'm losing track of the main point here though. When they look at contemporary art, right? they don't have the skill, because they were never taught it, to look at it and try and find their own meaning in it. So all they're left with is the only thing that they can grasp on objectively, which is the aesthetics, because they can't really, it's hard to go, I don't like this because it makes me feel bad. You're never going to see people say that. Maybe that's deep down why they don't like something. That could very much be it, right? But people aren't going to say that because it makes them seem illogical. People want to seem logical when they're laying out an argument. That's another thing you're taught in school, right? You got to be a logical person when you're doing it. You can't just say to the teacher, I don't like this book because it makes me feel this way. So how do you be a logical person? You point to the aesthetics. You say, this thing doesn't look like this other renowned piece of art that I know to be good, so it must be bad. I think that's where this conversation comes from. Because if people had a genuine, we're taught just how cool it is to look at something and come up with your own feelings, I think they would look at a lot more contemporary art. Not all of it. Not all by any means. I'm not saying this would solve the issue. I'm saying that it would cause a lot more people to look at these pieces, and instead of looking outward and seeing what they could say around the pieces, they'll see what they can feel, and they'll see what they can dig into these pieces and find. And that is where I don't think the art world is at fault, because I do think that there is a ton of value in this more, I'm going to refer to it with a very snobbish term, like intellectual art that you can't really appreciate on an aesthetic level. You got to think about it a little bit. I think there's a tremendous amount of value in that. But I don't think we've ever been taught properly, along with these institutions producing this art, how to actually look at it the right way. And I think as much as we've, there's a disconnect because we've democratized the ability to see this art. It's not just sitting in galleries anymore. It's now hit all of our feeds. But we have never democratized the ability to critically think about this art. That's where I think this conversation comes from. Sorry, I feel like I might have made a half point here today. This is the painting. So, I'm trying the blue thing again, going in. You probably can't even see it on this camera up here, but I'm trying to go in with these accents, kind of deepen. I want it to almost feel like this, uncanny valley of completeness, where it feels like there's some depth to things, but it's also unfinished at the same time. I don't think I'm doing it right here, though. I think I did it right, not yesterday, not the day before yesterday, but the day before that. Don't know what number paint talk that was. I want to say maybe 145. I think I did it right that day. But I think that's the next phase in adding more dimension to these deconstructed paintings. Other than that, I like this. I think it's nice. I think it's aesthetically pleasing. I think it's deconstructed well. And I will say, I think I have that half of this down. I just need to level these up to actually be able to produce a feeling. Also, we're going back to faces, because arms, torsos, these aren't producing feelings. I need the eyes in there to produce any sort of feeling in these paintings, so we're going back to those tomorrow. But follow me over on the Instagram. This will be up later this week with a reel or a short or whatever they're called, about talking about them, along with other stuff is on the Instagram too. I still haven't found a way to promote this Instagram well, guys. So leave your tips on that in the comments below, and until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Seiss. This has been Paint Talk episode 148. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.